Things are continuing to crash. People are, as there's more and more complexity, we see a lot of notable names where we look back at, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We look at flash sales. We look at new introductions of new versions of games, applications, new platforms, migrations, all sorts of different reasons. Slow response times. We see a lot of this as well. So it's, the sites still may be available, but we see a lot of performance issues around that. And the big question is, well, why? Well, so you're in the cloud, and as Michael was talking about, you need to prepare for the unexpected. You need to prepare for these sort of things. They do crop up, especially within the cloud, and it's really there's a couple of key points which we'll cover later on in the presentation. You also need to know how to respond to that, how to mitigate those things. So how do we be proactive? We're in the cloud. How do we handle those things? We know that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You look at this and how do you respond to those sort of things? There's a lot of things around load, too. So you have to take these things into consideration where we talk about rapid load ramp up. So in the gaming industry is a great example where it's different than, say, media. In the gaming, there's this massive anticipation. There's a lot of marketing that goes on. And it's really understanding your demographics, understanding and how people are going to be utilizing your web or mobile application that's sitting in the cloud. There's also a snowball effect. All of a sudden, one thing slows down, and it just creates more and more chaos, creates more and more slowness, and this really revolves around load, and you need to take on these challenges, and through testing, through monitoring, through understanding your numbers, you're going to be able to have a better grasp around how to handle this. Fixed capacity versus scalability. Hey, we're here at the RightScale conference. This is one of the great things we love working with them, is because we actually get to work with people that are putting applications in the cloud and actually demonstrating that it can actually scale. And then transparency. Nothing better. One of my favorite lines is actually saying, well, we get paid to tell people that their babies are ugly. And there's some truth in that because there's a lot of transparency that comes through that. We introduce a lot more visibility into what's going on within your application. And understanding that in the cloud, there's a lot of great tools out there. RightScale has a lot of great partners, and that you're able to really leverage that. So tips and suggestions. Number one, for peak and high load, you have backups. Understand how are you going to mitigate that and how are you going to take on challenges as you have peak traffic or significant load due to a viral campaign, due to any number of circumstances that may crop up. Flash sales, marketing. All of a sudden, one of the classic ones is DevOps doesn't know that, hey, marketing is doing a massive campaign and it's hitting our infrastructure. Would be a classic one, or something that goes viral because someone mistyped put the decimal the wrong direction, and all of a sudden people are consuming a bunch of their products. Small is fast. So having a lot of your instances, a lot of times people say, well, I should just have as big of instances as I should, and that's how I should handle it. Oftentimes we find that smaller it can be better, and it's really right-sizing your infrastructure within the cloud, which is going to be helpful. Extensive use of front-end cache systems. That definitely plays a significant role in optimizing those solutions. One of the things we talk a lot about is consider varnish. Once you leverage caching, being able to really streamline and optimize that environment. Less traffic is less problem. No direct database access. So really, if you think about it, you have less traffic going to that database because you're caching more. It's going to really optimize that environment. Some of this can be one-on-one stuff, but it's the constant reminder about these are the tips going into the cloud. This is how you can optimize. Implement scaling and queuing systems. Redirecting excess traffic. utilizing load balancers. There are a lot of solutions out there. People often come to us and say, which one should we use? Well, it does come down to the type of application you have, the architecture that you have set up, and really understanding that from a directional point of view, I'm trying to implement something that can scale effectively, and then I've seen it actually work. As well as queuing systems. We've worked with a lot of different kind of queuing systems where you don't lose that session and you don't crash the servers on the back end or the application. And then which goes in line with the informative wait pages. Bottom line, you look like a good Boy Scout. Always be prepared. So it goes. You might have heard this over and over, but it's really preparing around this. And testing the solution, testing the release. We talked about DevOps here earlier. We're actually throughout the conference. And one of the things that people are looking to do is, how do I introduce more visibility into what I'm doing? How do I introduce more visibility, reduce my costs, faster results, faster to deploy? And this is some key areas that when you're trying to optimize performance, that you incorporate this type of testing, this type of visibility into your development lifecycle. So kind of already spoke to it, but it's to understand how stable your site is, what that performance is under certain characteristics. What's unique about performance testing across the board is you can actually focus on stressing the application, stressing the network, stressing all sorts of different parts to understand how stable and how much integrity the environment has that you're in, the application, the databases, those sort of things. And ultimately, how do I make it faster? And watching it actually scale, which is really neat. I had a conversation with someone earlier today talking about, well, how do you handle it in production environments? And this is one of those things where you can carve out that canary environment and actually test during each release to see if you have any sort of performance degradation. Oh, already hit that one. So we talk about capacity and the capacity versus load, which is always a big challenge. And here we have a wonderful open highway going really fast. And this is a challenge that anticipating, well, what is my load going to be like? And within RightScale, being able to scale up and down and be able to meet that capacity. Otherwise, if you couldn't do that, then it's going to be a lot slower too. So handling that load. Another key area is having a test environment. So we're all familiar with having test environments. That's where you get to monkey around versus the production environment, where you need to be very precise, very strategic in how you're testing and when you're testing, finding those maintenance windows, having agreement across the board, especially within all the various departments that are stakeholders on these applications. Very critical. So load test, some of the key elements here is really looking at, this is a classic example. We showcase this a lot, but knowing where the point of collapse is within your application. Our engineers like to get paid to break things, and this is oftentimes what they discover, where the danger zones are. These are things that you need to be able to understand about your application, especially when you're in the cloud, because there's a lot more variables that are involved, and you want to still be able to know what these numbers are, knowing what the danger zone is, and knowing where those bottlenecks are occurring. So on that subject, having those targets. Each one of you that are responsible for this should have some performance targets around this. So when you talk about going from one cloud to another, you talk about introducing something new into your environment, is still understanding and being able to speak to what those numbers are. And having visibility in that allows you to do that. So stable beyond 100,000 concurrent users, able to handle 100,000 page views per hour, sub 4-second average response time, given a specific, it could be as simple as for a specific URL, a specific page, to a specific set of scenarios that you're running. My favorite is, well, how do you compare to the top 5 in your industry? Knowing, hey, this is in the retail, in the e-commerce space, There's obviously a direct correlation. Google even speaks to it a lot, where there's a direct correlation between how long it takes to get to a site and revenue. There's a direct impact on revenue for every time, for latency within specific applications. And being able to measure that, really it enables you and empowers you, especially on the technical side, to speak to those stakeholders, to change their thought, to perhaps even release more funds to support what you're trying to achieve in order to be number one in your industry. And then, of course, right here with 95% of our users shall make travel selections of purchase in less than 30 seconds. Everyone here has a phone. So the great thing about having a phone is, the good thing is it allows us to talk to the people we need to. Kind of the bad thing for those that have to support the applications is we've become more and more impatient. And so there's a ton of statistics that we have on, how much traffic, how much conversion rates drop, how much revenues drop, especially when they're waiting to hit a site or something like that, or they just merely go to your top competitor. Load test findings. So when you do performance testing, you're identifying the back-end calls. The database calls don't kill your application. A lot of times it can be just as simple as lack of caching. It can be stuff within it can be a number of things within the database architecture itself, but oftentimes it can be as simple as establishing proper caching and optimizing that. Checking the delivery of static content. You're optimizing some of these solutions. You're looking at CDNs. There's a lot of providers out there. Sedexis is here today. They've got some interesting technology allowing to load balance even the CDNs, which is a lot of fun. And then web infrastructure. So, it's some of this stuff, it really comes down to when we do these sort of tests, or anybody for that matter that can do that. You can go to the internet today and find some tools as well. And your goal is to really understand where those bottlenecks are occurring, what your numbers are, what your performance numbers should be, and establish those. Knowing your numbers, which is the classic average where we're looking at over time from a monitoring perspective. We see, it can be seasonality, it could be specific events. People are scratching their heads saying, ultimately, why are my numbers the way they are? Well, they are because you see a spike or there's some sort of deviation that's going on in a particular part of the day. I worked with a company that does a web-to-print company. And first of all, we did some monitoring like this and saw some trending and actually compared it to some of their top competitors. They ranked number 5 out of the top 5. So they were the worst. And they were able to justify additional investment into their technology, in the cloud, and they were actually able to bump themselves from being number 5 to actually be number 2 and saw a direct correlation in revenue. And this is where you have a nice keen insight into what your trending should be and looking at what those outliers are. As well as seeing what looks over time. So we're polling these things and being able to understand what those numbers are and seeing what the spikes are. And oftentimes, like over there to the far left, it's a Monday, it's a Friday, 10/19, I think it was like a Friday afternoon. Well, everyone's trying to get their print jobs in, before the end of the day so that they can be done and actually have it the following Monday. And so they realized that they were losing a lot of money because they weren't meeting the needs of where 80% of the business was being performed. But during the rest of the day and during the rest of the week, everything was fine. So the numbers don't lie. And this is all within your grasp of the computer, being able to pull this up, establishing a baseline. Ask yourself this question today. Do you have a baseline? Do you know what your number is for that web or mobile application that you have? If you don't, I highly encourage that you do. And it can be as simple as, hey, for the home page, hey, for this particular part of the application or for this sequence, this is what our baseline is, and use that. Have everybody rally around that. And it's actually very powerful. We talk about DevOps, and this is something that everybody can actually rally around, is what are our numbers and what are we going after. We talk about SLAs. That's been around a long time, but really adhering to that. Having established SLAs, having what our response time should be, having everybody across all the departments rally behind that so that they all champion that and understand, hey, These are going to be our numbers. And this is something that we're seeing a lot more organizations beginning to adopt, and which is really exciting. Traditionally it was about being up or down, and there's a ton of organizations out there that can tell you that. No longer is it about that. It's a combination of things. The monitoring is, hey, it's down, alerts, great. Got my SLAs, great. But now it is, we have, IE, Chrome, Firefox. How is it within all those different browsers? What's the experience like? The scenarios, what are the different scenarios? Like the classic ones will be, hey, registration is a huge part of our conversion. Well, you need to understand what those numbers should be. And establishing those, you can completely do that. And having that is something that everybody champions around. In the gaming, how long does it take somebody to actually become a gamer? Be able to log into the system, establish an account, and then actually be a converted customer. And then, of course, analytics, understanding the complexities behind what's going on internally, not only from a hardware perspective, from a software perspective, an application perspective, but also being able to address and put SLAs on those applications and understanding some trending so that you can have that monthly, quarterly meeting around those analytics and ultimately correlating that. So, some of the stuff that we do is correlating how many users are on our site. So Google Analytics. What was Akamai doing? And what were we doing with, what was going on with the database calls going to the back-end system while putting a specific load on this? This is really good analytics, really good insight into your application, provides clear visibility, and also allows you to make, and enable you to make really solid decisions on your next revision or what you're doing with your application. End user performance monitoring. What's the value? Well, the value around end user performance monitoring is really ensuring at the end of the day that the application's being delivered. Within RightScale, we've been doing some fun stuff around that, and we've got something coming out soon that's going to really talk about being able to introduce end user performance monitoring as part of the criteria so that you can make additional business decisions around that. And at the end of the day, that's where the buck stops, right? The buck stops with that person. Can that person be on that phone? Can that person access your site through the web, on their computer, on their iPad, on their whatever their mobile devices may be? That's the real value, and be able to measure that and be actually able to know that number globally, especially if that's who your audience is very vital. So, the tips and suggestions, I kind of like to leave it to 3 different things. Set your goals. So as you go into the cloud, if you're not there already, set those goals. If you're already in there, ask yourself, do you have those goals? Does each one of the folks in your departments have those goals? Do you all rally behind what those goals are? Around uptime, around performance, around specific performance. Even setting that as incentives for within your organization. That's something that we're also starting to see more and more as being very compelling, because it's one thing to develop an application and get it into the environment, but it's a whole other thing to actually shoot for a goal that adheres to overall performance. We talk about, there's a lot of other things in life that are measured by performance there. Hate the average and work with the exceptions. Find out what those outliers are and start chipping away. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose because you get a lot of data. Well, focus on what those exceptions are, where you're seeing, some the outliers, and start with those, and then remove, the 10 worst elements. Like it could be like the 10 worst URLs. As you understand, it's like, man, I have a third party. One of our customers working with has 72 different domains on their homepage. I think it was one of them. And they're starting to chip away at that because they were scratching their head saying, well, everything we have is fast, but they have 72 different domains on their web page, which is causing the overall performance of the actual site to be slow. And then the fire drill, help identifying problems and correlating data. Continue to test, and test, and test. Incorporate it into your life cycle. Incorporate it into your DevOps strategy. It provides more visibility in your application. So, Cliff Notes. Performance testing, well, it'll help you discover the weakest link in advance, saving you a lot of time and money. And this goes without saying. It helps you identify the weakest link. I had to say that. And then check your numbers and know your applications. Know what the performance are. And challenge those that may manage that may be the stakeholders, to actually adopt that, because it makes for a much more powerful, meaningful conversation when you're talking to people and saying, hey, what should these metrics be? And then lastly is, you plan for the unexpected, and because it does happen every day. I have a bunch of alerts that trigger, that says, hey, this site failed today, that application went down, this broke down. So we get a constant barrage of understanding what's going on, and it's amazing still today. But it can be everything from a DDoS attack, ATP, to any number of others. Something went viral, any number of things. So at the end of the day, especially if you're responsible for that application, that's something that you really need to be focused on and have a very clear understanding. Any questions?
So, Craig, there was talk in the earlier sessions about hybrid clouds and what you put in your public and in your private, and even some about keeping an eye on cost. So maybe without naming the name of the company, there's a project where you and I worked on where somebody actually sort of the same environment in a public cloud and their own private cloud, and then using you guys. Yeah. Load to, I think, 100,000. Maybe you can sort of describe that. And,
sure.
Because they were trying to get at how much does it cost to maintain similar. And it's hard to compare apples to apples, but the apples to apples is what does 100,000 users look like in this one? And maybe you can describe it a little.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the newer things that we've been doing a lot of is that, thanks Irwin for that, has been customers come to us and say, well, we're thinking of utilizing this cloud versus that cloud. We're thinking of changing, using this load balancing technology versus the other one. A number of different strategies come to mind. What should we do? Well, ultimately, in this customer's situation, they wanted to see what 100,000 concurrent users look like. And they wanted to see, hey, I want to place it here versus there. It's in a public versus private. And they wanted to understand what was the cost impact. And by doing this testing, we're actually able to present to this application that many users, see what the performance is like, and empower them and enable them to make the right business decisions. Not only help right-size the environment, as you hear about, but also understand what are the costs associated with that. And I have to say, it was quite staggering to see what the benefits were. And it was very clear to them. And what they did is they were able to walk away with the assurance that they've done their due diligence on the direction they were going, where they were hosting, how they were hosting, and some of the technology choices they made. All right. Any other questions? Fantastic. Clear, concise? Good. All right. Well, I'll be around the show if you have any questions. Again, my name is Craig Irwin with Apica, and we thank you for coming. Great. Thank you.